Imagine boarding a plane, excited for your journey, only to be told to give up your seat. Not because you did anything wrong, but because someone decided you didn't belong there. Two black siblings, a furious Karen, and a flight crew desperate to please the wrong person. Until a single phone call flips the entire flight upside down. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. Secrets unravel, power is revealed, and karma strikes harder than anyone could imagine. This isn't just a story, it's a real-life plot twist you won't believe. Ebony Davenport, a sharp-witted 19-year-old with a passion for videography, was busy adjusting her camera's focus as she stood by the floor-to-ceiling window at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. The August sun bathed the runway in shimmering heat, and countless planes roared to life outside, reminding her of the infinite possibilities each flight carried. Her younger brother, 17-year-old Elijah, clutched his carry-on backpack with nervous enthusiasm. Despite his youth, Elijah carried himself with a maturity far beyond his years. He was a budding pianist, and the trip to Los Angeles meant the world to him. He had managed to secure an audition at a prestigious music conservatory. Their father, Charles Davenport, had told them he had somewhat of a stake in aviation, but never quite revealed the true extent of his involvement. He was a reserved man by nature, reluctant to flaunt the privileges life had afforded him. Ebony and Elijah were accustomed to economy-class seats and the typical bustle of airport terminals. They rarely questioned why some staffers occasionally seemed to recognize their last name. Davenport was common enough that it never raised immediate suspicion. Little did they know that behind the scenes, their father was the majority owner of Skyways Airlines, one of the country's most successful commercial carriers. That morning, Ebony and Elijah arrived at JFK brimming with excitement and anticipation. Ebony was eager to document the entire journey on her camera, dreaming of making a travel vlog. Elijah couldn't wait to lean his head against the airplane window and watch the clouds roll by as he imagined his upcoming audition. In their minds, this was going to be an unforgettable trip, though neither of them could predict just how unforgettable it would become. After breezing through security, they approached their gate C-33, where their flight to Los Angeles would soon begin boarding. Passengers gathered around the waiting area, families wrangling kids and strollers, business people tapping away on laptops, and tourists flipping through travel guides. Ebony scanned the crowd, noticing a few people giving them curious glances. Over the years, she had become adept at reading subtle expressions, some friendly, others less so. She shrugged it off, focusing on the bright side, a direct coast-to-coast flight in the middle of summer, one that promised new opportunities and excitement. Elijah tapped Ebony's shoulder. "Hey sis," he murmured. "Do you think Dad will be meeting us in LA?" He was so cryptic about this trip. Ebony gave him a playful nudge. "You know how Dad is, always a surprise up his sleeve," she teased. "But I bet he'll swing by at some point. He's always busy, but he can never resist dropping in to see how our big adventures are going." A voice crackled over the intercom. "Passengers of Skyways Airlines Flight 722, non-stop service to Los Angeles International Airport. We will begin pre-boarding for those needing special assistance or traveling with small children. Please form a line near the gate." Ebony and Elijah grinned at each other and moved closer to the gate. Elijah fiddled with the straps of his backpack, mentally reviewing chord progressions for his audition piece. Ebony mentally rehearsed the opening lines for her video's intro. She steadied her camera and murmured, "All right, Ebony's travel diaries. Here we go." She was determined to capture every nuance of this experience from their seats on the plane to the moment they landed in Los Angeles. Boarding proceeded swiftly. When their group number was called, they scanned their boarding passes and headed down the jet bridge. The slight hum of the aircraft's engine sent a pleasant rush of adrenaline through them. Stepping into the aircraft cabin, they breathed in the familiar smell of upholstery, coffee, and recirculated air. A flight attendant, looking somewhat harried, offered them a perfunctory smile before directing them to their seats near the front of the cabin. Ebony and Elijah had managed to get upgraded to premium economy, a welcome little gift from their father, though they still believed it was purely their father's small perk from being a loyal customer all these years. They settled into seats 8A and 8B. Ebony placed her camera bag at her feet, ensuring it was secure, while Elijah pulled out a small notepad filled with musical notations. Just have to revise my piece a little, Elijah mumbled, scanning the pages. Ebony nodded and gave him a reassuring smile. You'll do great. She just knew it. Looking around, Ebony marveled at the large windows, comfortable seat pitch, and extra legroom, more than they'd ever had on a flight before. Little did they know, the real turbulence was still ahead. And it wouldn't come from storm clouds or pilot announcements. Instead, it would come in the form of a cunning, entitled passenger and a flight crew unwittingly stepping into the biggest mistake of their professional lives. Just minutes after Ebony and Elijah got comfortable, the cabin filled quickly with passengers maneuvering down the aisle, balancing carry-ons, and searching overhead compartments. A faint chatter buzzed through the aircraft as strangers swapped seats with family members or tried to store oversized luggage. Flight attendants bustled about, verifying seat assignments and making sure safety protocols would be followed. Ebony heard a voice that was both commanding and condescending drifting from the front entrance. "Excuse me, step aside," the voice hissed. "Can't you see I have priority boarding?" The speaker was a middle-aged woman with sharply styled blonde hair, an unfortunate archetype Ebony recognized from viral internet videos as a Karen. She was impeccably dressed in an off-white blazer, pressed trousers, and high heels, ill-suited for an airplane aisle. Her demeanor radiated impatience and entitlement. She held a large tote bag in one hand and clutched what looked like a designer purse in the other. A flight attendant attempted to greet her, but the woman brushed right past, only tossing a curt nod in acknowledgement. Karen Ebony privately labeled her that surveyed the seats as if she were personally inspecting them. It appeared she was in business class a few rows ahead, but Ebony couldn't help noticing how the woman lingered beside row 8, scanning Ebony, Elijah, and their seats with an intensity that made Ebony's skin prickle. Elijah paused from his note-taking. "Do you know her?" he whispered. Ebony shook her head. Yet, even before the flight took off, she had a nagging feeling that this woman's presence spelled trouble. Karen let out a dramatic sigh, then rolled her eyes in the direction of the flight attendant. "These are not the seats I requested," she declared in a shrill tone that could have carried across the entire aircraft. "I specifically booked seats with more legroom. I won't be comfortable in any other row. I fly skyways frequently. My loyalty status is Executive Diamond, or have you forgotten that?" The flight attendant, obviously flustered, tried to remain polite. "Ma'am, I understand your concern," but Karen snapped her fingers. "I don't want an explanation. I want the seats I booked." Then, in a lower voice, she added, "And please do hurry. I don't have all day." Elijah and Ebony exchanged wary looks. The flight attendant checked Karen's boarding pass again and frowned. "Your assigned seat is 12A in Premium Economy, which is very comfortable. Unfortunately, seats in row 8 are already taken." Karen's gaze zeroed in on Ebony and Elijah. Her piercing stare flicked over them like they were squatters in a house she owned. Ebony quickly faced forward, not wanting to engage in a confrontation before the plane even took off, but she could feel the intensity of the woman's glare burning the back of her neck. "I see who's occupying those seats," Karen said under her breath, though loud enough for Ebony and Elijah to hear. It was as though she had found her scapegoats. Ebony, a young black woman with curly hair pinned up in a neat bun, and Elijah, a lanky black teenager with well-worn sneakers. The flight attendant's eyes darted nervously between the siblings and the irate passenger. Karen's tone sharpened. "I'd like you to fix this," she demanded, pointing at the flight attendant and then wagging a finger toward Ebony and Elijah. "I was promised seats in row 8, specifically on the left side so I could be near the front. This is absolutely unacceptable." Ebony's stomach churned. She hated to assume the worst of people, but the pointed way Karen was addressing them felt more personal than a simple seat dispute. Elijah shot Ebony a worried glance. The flight attendant's face paled, uncertain how to proceed. Already, Ebony suspected that this was no ordinary seat mix-up. The tension that blanketed their row was thick enough to cut through with a plastic butter knife. To Ebony's relief, another flight attendant arrived to assist. A woman in her late 20s with a calm demeanor. She tried explaining to Karen that the flight was fully booked and the siblings had legitimate boarding passes for row 8. Karen's only response was a huff of indignation. "We'll see about that," she muttered as she stomped off toward the front of the plane, presumably to speak to the lead flight attendant or maybe even the captain. Elijah exhaled in relief. Guess we dodged a bullet. Ebony wasn't so sure. She watched as Karen conversed in hushed but insistent tones with another flight attendant near the cockpit door. The attendant seemed to be listening intently, occasionally glancing in their direction. Ebony turned back to Elijah, who was trying to refocus on his musical notes. She whispered, "I have a bad feeling that might not be the last we see of her." Trying to calm her nerves, Ebony busied herself by adjusting the lens on her camera, capturing small details like the overhead panel and the safety card in the seatback pocket. She planned to splice them into her travel vlog. As she recorded, she took quiet note of Karen's raised voice drifting intermittently down the aisle. Phrases like, "Do you know who I am?" and "I spend thousands on flights," peppered her outburst. Little did Ebony and Elijah realize those words were about to set the stage for an unforgettable showdown. Before the plane would even close its doors for takeoff, the seeds of a larger confrontation were being planted, one that would test the siblings' composure, the airline staff's integrity, and the lengths to which a father would go to protect his children. The bustle of final boarding announcements crackled over the intercom, and passengers began stuffing last-minute items into overhead bins. Seat belts clicked shut. A low hum of air conditioning whispered through the vents. While Ebony and Elijah tried to settle, the negative energy in the cabin seemed to coalesce around Karen. From her vantage point near the front galley, Karen was gesturing animatedly at a tall, middle-aged flight attendant wearing a crisp uniform and a golden name tag that read, "Head Purser, Robert Evans." Robert's features were set in a mask of professional composure, but Ebony could tell he was growing increasingly uncomfortable as Karen's demands escalated. Ebony flicked her eyes to Elijah, who was silently mouthing the notes for his audition piece, a mental exercise he used to calm his nerves. She knew him well enough to recognize that his focus was faltering. This time, the tension on the plane was more than just nerves about a big audition. It was the type of confrontation that no one wants to deal with at 35,000 feet. Suddenly, Karen stormed back down the aisle, her designer heels clacking like a metronome of impending trouble. She paused at row 8 and glared at Ebony and Elijah. "I've spoken to the head purser," she announced, her eyes roving over them with an air of superiority. "He understands that my seat assignment has been mishandled." She pointed at Ebony and Elijah's seats. "I want these seats, and I'm going to have them." Elijah blinked, alarmed. Ebony tried to maintain her composure, but she could feel her chest tighten. In an effort to stay polite, Ebony replied, "These are the seats we were given, ma'am. If there's an error in the airline system, you should probably work it out with the gate agent." Karen snorted, folding her arms. "I've already done that. Apparently, the flight is sold out. You two should just move and let's make this easier for everyone." Elijah finally spoke up, voice trembling slightly. "Why should we move? We paid for these seats, or at least they were assigned to us. We have every right to be here." Karen's face twisted into a scowl that only deepened the lines around her mouth. "You think you're entitled to these premium economy seats?" she asked, her tone laced with condescension. "I've got news for you kids. People like me fly these seats all the time. I'm a platinum-level flyer, and this airline knows me well." Behind her, Robert Evans, the head purser, arrived. He offered a diplomatic smile. "Ma'am, perhaps we can find a resolution that works for everyone." Karen tossed her hair back. "Yes, we can move them." She jabbed a manicured finger at Ebony and Elijah. "I'm sure there are seats in the back." Ebony bristled, but she tried to remain calm, remembering her father's teachings about dealing with conflict. "Remain polite, stand your ground, and document everything if necessary." She discreetly turned on her camera, letting it record from her lap. She didn't want to aggravate the situation, but she knew it might be important to have a record if things escalated. Robert cleared his throat. "I'm afraid the flight is quite full, and these passengers also have a valid claim to their seats. Could I perhaps offer you a compensation voucher for another seat on a different flight, or maybe see if we can rebook you in an even better seat on tomorrow's flight?" Karen set her jaw. "Absolutely not. I need to fly today. I'm not waiting until tomorrow, and I'm not sitting behind row 8. If you won't make the move, then I'll have to escalate this further." With that ominous statement, she turned on her heel and marched toward the cockpit. The head purser followed, obviously concerned. Ebony felt her pulse throbbing in her temples. "What does she mean by escalate?" Elijah whispered. Ebony shrugged, trying to appear calmer than she felt. "I don't know, but let's just stay put. We have our boarding passes. We haven't done anything wrong." Passengers seated nearby had started taking notice. Some looked annoyed by the commotion. Others flashed Ebony and Elijah sympathetic smiles. An older man in row 9 leaned forward and whispered, "Don't worry. She's just being a typical Karen. She can't force you out of your seats." Ebony nodded, grateful for his reassurance, but the uneasy feeling in her gut remained. A few minutes passed, and Ebony hoped that maybe the fiasco would end there. Perhaps Karen would cool off or the cabin doors would close and the flight would proceed. But her hopes were dashed when she saw a second flight attendant approach them, a stern look on her face. Her name tag read, "Flight Attendant Supervisor, Pamela." Pamela knelt beside Ebony's seat, her voice lowered. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but we have a passenger who insists these seats were originally booked under her name. We might need you to move." Both Ebony and Elijah stared at her in disbelief. Ebony tried to keep her voice steady. "We have our boarding passes right here showing row 8. We boarded with no issue. We haven't done anything to violate the airline's policy." Pamela nodded sympathetically, but there was tension in her gaze. "I understand, but sometimes there are booking errors, and we're trying to accommodate all our passengers, especially those who are frequent flyers. Could you please gather your belongings? We'd like to seat you further back in the plane." Elijah felt his temper flare, though he remained soft-spoken. "No. With all due respect, no. We have these seats. Why should we move?" Pamela straightened. "I'm trying to prevent a bigger conflict. That's all. If you continue to resist, this might get escalated to the captain. We don't want to have to remove anyone from the flight entirely." At the mention of being removed from the flight, Ebony felt a flash of genuine fear. She needed to record her vlog for her YouTube channel. Elijah had his audition in Los Angeles, and they had done nothing wrong. Still, she recalled headlines in which passengers were forced off planes due to seat disputes or overbooking. This can't be happening, Ebony thought. She inhaled slowly. "We are refusing to move. We paid for these seats, and they are rightfully assigned to us," she said, lifting her phone in a shaky hand to show their electronic boarding passes again. "We won't move unless there's some official reason." Pamela pressed her lips together. "Very well. I'll need to speak with the captain." She walked away. Elijah tapped Ebony's shoulder. "This is crazy," he whispered. "They can't make us move for no good reason, right?" Ebony could only nod and place a reassuring hand on her brother's arm, though inside she was boiling with anger and worry. The plane had not even left the gate, and already they felt cornered by the entitled demands of one passenger and a flight crew seemingly bent on appeasing her. Neither sibling realized it yet, but this was just the opening act of a drama that would soon spiral far beyond seat assignments, courtesy vouchers, or petty arguments. The entire airline staff was moments away from making a choice that would alter their careers and Ebony and Elijah's lives forever. Moments later, the flight deck door opened, and the captain himself, Captain Marcus Hayes, stepped into the cabin. His face was somber, and he moved with the firm authority of someone who'd spent years in the cockpit. He spoke briefly with Robert Evans and Pamela, and then, to Ebony's dismay, he approached row 8 with Karen trailing behind him like a triumphant predator. "Good afternoon," Captain Hayes greeted, though his voice held a weary edge. "We're experiencing a conflict over seat assignments. Our priority is ensuring a safe, on-time departure." Karen nodded emphatically, shooting Ebony and Elijah a smug glance. Ebony tightened her grip on her camera, which was still recording discreetly. She noticed that other passengers had begun filming the scene with their phones. The tension was palpable. Even the overhead air vents seemed to blow more harshly than usual. Captain Hayes cleared his throat. "The passenger here, Ms. Caldwell, claimed she purchased these seats. There might have been a booking discrepancy. For the sake of a smooth flight, we would like to request that you two relocate. We have 2 seats in row 27 that will be given to you at no additional charge. Elijah couldn't believe what he was hearing. This is not fair, he said, voice quivering. We have valid boarding passes. Karen folded her arms, an infuriating smile tugging at the corners of her mouth as she observed Ebony and Elijah's distress. Kids, sometimes things in life aren't fair, she said with a dismissive shrug. Captain Hayes raised a hand to quell further argument. I understand your frustration. However, we need to resolve this quickly. If we don't, we risk delaying the flight for everyone on board. If you refuse, we have the option to remove you from this flight altogether for non-compliance with crew instructions. The weight of his words hung in the air like a thick fog. Ebony looked around, searching for any sign of help from the other passengers. She saw sympathetic faces, but no one wanted to get involved in a confrontation that could escalate to them being removed from the plane as well. On a trembling inhale, Ebony forced herself to speak calmly. Captain Hayes, we are simply following what our boarding passes say. We didn't create this situation. Isn't there some official record the airline can check to confirm seat ownership? Karen exhaled dramatically as if weary from Ebony's troublesome questions. It doesn't matter. I have priority status. You're in my seats. Let's not drag this out. Captain Hayes's expression softened slightly, as though he felt guilty, but he was bound by protocol or perhaps pressured by a frequent flyer who claimed to be important. Ma'am, sir, he addressed Ebony and Elijah. It would really help if you cooperate. The flight needs to depart, and we have to settle this seat matter. If you can't comply, I'm afraid we'll have to deplane you. Elijah looked ready to protest further, but Ebony placed a hand on his arm. She realized that they had an audition to reach and that a bigger confrontation might risk them being stranded at JFK with no immediate recourse. Their father, Charles Davenport, wasn't even in the same state. For a brief moment, Ebony wondered if she should text or call him, but the flight was set to depart at any minute, and phone signals were being shut off. Seeing no immediate way to fight without risking more severe consequences, Ebony nodded slowly. Fine, she said, her voice tinged with resignation and anger. But we do this under protest. I want it noted that we're being forced to switch seats against our will. Karen let out a scoff that was half laugh, half sneer. Thank you. That wasn't so hard, was it? The siblings unbuckled their seatbelts. Elijah's cheeks burned with humiliation as he packed away his notepad, and Ebony's heart pounded with indignation. Other passengers murmured in discomfort. A baby in row 10 started crying, adding to the collective stress. Ebony and Elijah gathered their carry-ons, and with the eyes of nearly everyone on the plane watching, they began the long, humiliating walk down the aisle to row 27. En route, Ebony felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see the older man from row 9. He silently slipped her a small note that read, "I'm sorry this happened." "It's wrong." She offered him a grateful but shaky smile. Meanwhile, the head purser, Robert Evans, hustled behind them, probably to ensure they actually followed through and moved. They found their new seats sandwiched between a family of 4 and 2 large men, presumably traveling on business. The seats were narrower, leg room scarce, the overhead compartment already jammed. Elijah had to stow his bag beneath his feet, leaving him almost no room to stretch out. Ebony clicked her seatbelt with a trembling hand, tears threatening to escape. She felt a potent mix of anger, embarrassment, and powerlessness. Still, she tried to remind herself to stay level-headed. There would be other ways to seek justice after they landed. Perhaps a formal complaint. Yet, Ebony had no clue just how big their next step would be. What she didn't realize was that in the course of the next few hours, events would unfold in such a dramatic way that Karen's smug victory would be cut short, and the entire flight crew, from the purser to the captain, would face an upheaval like nothing they'd ever experienced. All it would take was one phone call to the right person. And that person, though Ebony and Elijah did not fully appreciate it yet, was their father, Charles Davenport, the airline's secret owner. The flight finally pushed back from the gate, nearly 30 minutes behind schedule, thanks to the seat fiasco. Ebony and Elijah sat stiffly in row 27 as the safety demonstration began. Their anger and humiliation simmered beneath the surface, each moment magnified by the claustrophobic cabin. Elijah tried to distract himself by reading the in-flight magazine, but the text blurred as he replayed the confrontation in his mind. Ebony, meanwhile, checked that her phone was in airplane mode, her camera still discreetly recording on her lap. When the plane roared down the runway and lifted into the bright blue sky, Elijah silently willed himself to think about his upcoming audition. Yet, the memory of Karen's smug face was like a mental anchor dragging him down. Ebony tried to console him by pointing out the window where the cityscape of New York gradually gave way to a sea of clouds, but each attempt at comfort felt futile. The excitement they'd carried to the airport had been replaced with a hollow ache. As soon as the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign turned off, the flight attendants began rolling out the snack carts. Ebony felt her phone vibrate. A delayed text message from her father must have come through before takeoff. She read it quietly. Dad, Charles Davenport. Hey Ebony, I know you're about to take off. Just wanted to say I hope you and Elijah have a safe flight. If you need anything, absolutely anything, call me. I'll be in LA soon for a meeting. We can celebrate Elijah's audition together. Love you both. Ebony's heart panged. He had no idea of the chaos that had erupted on the plane. She debated whether to respond. Then she recalled that phone calls were restricted during flight, but Wi-Fi texting might be possible if she paid for the service. The irony that her father, the man who secretly owned Skyways Airlines, was only a text away both comforted and rattled her. She decided to purchase the in-flight Wi-Fi. Her frustrations bubbled up as she typed a long, detailed text about what had happened, only to have a pop-up error say the Wi-Fi connection was temporarily unavailable. Figures, Ebony muttered under her breath, switching off her phone screen in frustration. She'd try again later, maybe after the flight attendants finished setting up the cabin service. An hour into the flight, Ebony gave it another try. This time, the Wi-Fi connected. She immediately drafted a message to her father summarizing in raw detail how they were humiliated and forced to move to the back of the plane for a belligerent passenger. She carefully described the flight number, Skyways 722, the seat numbers, and how the captain had threatened to remove them if they didn't comply. She ended the text with, I don't want to overreact, but this felt so wrong. I know you do business with these people, but what happened was unacceptable. I'm worried about Elijah. He's really upset. Please help. She hit send, half expecting an instant reply, but no dots appeared on her screen. Charles Davenport wasn't reading the message yet. Maybe he was in a meeting or his phone was on silent. Ebony sank back into her seat, deflated. 15 minutes later, Ebony's phone vibrated. She sat up straighter in her seat. Dad, Charles Davenport. I'm so sorry this happened. I'm beyond furious. I'll handle it. Sit tight. Everything's going to be okay. A wave of relief washed over Ebony, though it was tinged with uncertainty. How exactly would he handle it? She knew he had connections, especially within Skyways, but she didn't fully grasp the enormity of his power over the airline. Just then, Ebony noticed something peculiar. Up at the front of the plane, two flight attendants and the head purser, Robert Evans, suddenly clustered around a seatback phone. Their faces appeared tense. Ebony assumed it might be a routine cockpit call, perhaps turbulence ahead or something else flight-related, but the sense of agitation among the crew gave Ebony a hunch. Her father might already be setting wheels in motion. Minutes later, a third flight attendant scurried from first class to the cockpit, her expression filled with concern. Karen, who was comfortably settled in Ebony's original seat in row 8, seemed oblivious, sipping a sparkling beverage while flipping through a magazine. Ebony couldn't hear anything from her vantage point in row 27, but she surmised the cabin staff had received some urgent message. Finally, Captain Hayes emerged once more and headed straight for the seatback phone. He seemed to be in a hushed, intense conversation, periodically glancing around the cabin. Ebony's heartbeat quickened. Could it be her father calling the flight deck? The notion seemed surreal. A ding from her phone signaled another incoming text. Dad, Charles Davenport. Sit back and relax if you can. I'm on a call with corporate. This will be sorted out soon. Ebony pressed a hand over her mouth, a mixture of excitement and nervousness coursing through her. She had never seen her father wield his influence so directly. Typically, he was laid back about his business, rarely using his position as leverage. But now, Ebony realized just how determined he could be when his children were wronged. Across the aisle, Elijah mouthed, "What's going on?" Ebony discreetly showed him the texts. His eyes lit with the faintest spark of hope. Karen's victory might be more fleeting than she ever imagined. The next chapter of this drama was about to explode into full view. Hold on tight, because the twist is about to get even wilder. Ebony could only wonder how the flight crew, who had so brazenly sided with Karen, would react once they learned who exactly they had tried to strong-arm. Back on the ground, miles away in his sleek Manhattan office, Charles Davenport ended the call with Skyway's Airline's corporate liaison. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers drumming the glass tabletop. A swirl of intense emotions churned in him. Outrage at the humiliating treatment of his children. Disbelief that a crew under his own company's umbrella would cater to the demands of an entitled passenger. And a hint of regret that he had kept his ownership so low-key that even Elijah were unaware of the full scope of his power. Charles hadn't planned it this way. Years ago, when he first acquired a majority stake in Skyways, he decided to remain a silent partner to keep life simple for his family. He wanted Ebony and Elijah to grow up with humility and to treat people with respect, whether they were sitting in first class or the last row of a flight. He despised arrogance and entitlement in all its forms. Now, ironically, that very courtesy had led to this fiasco. Ebony and Elijah had no official VIP status, and the flight crew had no clue that the black siblings in row 27 were the children of Skyway's principal owner. Seething with frustration, Charles stood and walked to the window, which offered an expansive view of the New York skyline. He inhaled, reminding himself to keep a level head. Rash decisions made in anger could backfire, but this was personal. No one threatened his kids with deplaning, no matter who they thought they were serving. The phone on his desk rang. It was Lucinda Frost, the company's chief operating officer. Charles quickly crossed the office and answered on speakerphone. "Lucinda," he greeted. "Tell me what you found out." Lucinda's voice cracked slightly. She was clearly rattled. "I just spoke to the flight's captain, Marcus Hayes. He confirmed that a woman named Margaret Caldwell, someone who apparently holds a platinum frequent flyer status, demanded seats in row 8. There was a scramble, and the 2 passengers assigned there were forced to move. He said the flight was delayed, and apparently the siblings were threatened with removal from the flight if they refused." Charles tensed his jaw. "That's consistent with what Ebony told me." Lucinda sighed heavily. "He apologized profusely, says he regrets how it was handled, but at the time he felt pressured to de-escalate a potential confrontation. He claims he never would have gone through with removing them from the flight, only threatened to do so to calm Miss Caldwell." Charles barked a hollow laugh. Calm Miss Caldwell or appease her? On the other end, Lucinda's silence spoke volumes. "Finally," she added, "we have policies in place to prevent such discriminatory practices. The entire crew might face disciplinary action. I'm ready to do an immediate conference call with our executive team." A slight smirk formed on Charles's lips, though it carried no joy. "We'll do more than that, Lucinda. Let them land in LA first. I want that entire crew, top to bottom, grounded until further notice. We're not going to let this pass. But for now, keep this confidential. I want to handle the situation with a personal touch." Lucinda acknowledged. "Understood, Mr. Davenport." She quickly ended the call. Charles pressed a hand to his temples, a headache forming. In that moment, he flashed back to his own youth, when he faced discrimination in subtle and overt forms, even as he quietly built his business empire. For him, money was never about power over others. It was about securing independence. But now that money gave him the ability, perhaps even the responsibility, to fight for Ebony and Elijah. He'd do it 1,000 times over. He inhaled deeply once more, and then dialed Ebony. Of course, the call wouldn't go through because they were mid-flight. He left a voice message, his tone resolute yet comforting. "Hey, sweetheart. Dad, here. Listen. I know you two have been through quite an ordeal. I want you to stay calm. We'll make it right as soon as you land. Try to rest. I'm proud of how you kept your composure. Love you." He hung up and stared at the photograph on his desk. A candid picture of Ebony and Elijah from years ago riding bicycles in the park. They looked so carefree, oblivious to the complexities of the world. Charles vowed that once they touched down in Los Angeles, the siblings would learn that they had a powerful advocate on their side, and Karen, plus the entire flight crew, would learn the hard way that no one mistreated Charles Davenport's children without facing consequences. High above the clouds, Ebony and Elijah tried to relax in row 27. The flight attendants came around with drink service, but Ebony waved them off, too upset to accept the meager peace offering of watered-down soda. Elijah sipped water in silence, his mind drifting to the humiliating confrontation. The seatbelt sign blinked off after a mild patch of turbulence, and Ebony leaned toward her brother. "Dad texted me," she whispered. "He said he's handling it, so maybe something's happening right now." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "What can he really do, though? He's a business consultant or something, right?" Ebony shrugged, uncertain how much to reveal. Over the years, she and Elijah knew Charles dabbled in various industries: real estate, tech investments, philanthropic work, but Ebony was starting to suspect that his stake in Skyways might be far more significant than they'd ever realized. "I'm not sure," she finally said, "but I trust him." Just then, a subtle commotion drew their attention toward the front of the cabin. They saw Robert Evans, the head purser, pick up the seatback phone again. He listened intently, glancing nervously in Ebony and Elijah's direction. Meanwhile, Pamela, the flight attendant supervisor, hurried to row 8. Karen, who had been reading a glossy magazine and munching on complimentary snacks, now looked irritated as Pamela spoke to her in a hushed tone. Ebony couldn't hear the exchange, but she noted Karen's expression shift from annoyance to mild alarm. Karen then shot Ebony and Elijah a look that was pure venom. Elijah noticed too. "Why is she looking at us like that?" Ebony's phone vibrated in her pocket again. She snuck it out carefully, shielding the screen. "Dad, Charles Davenport. Talk to the captain and corporate. We're working to rectify this while you're still in the air. You might see some changes in attitude soon." Before Ebony could even finish reading, she noticed the flight attendants converging at the front again. Captain Hayes emerged from the cockpit and had a quick, seemingly tense conversation with Robert Evans. Then, in a bizarre turn of events, Karen stood up. She gesticulated in protest, her voice too distant to carry clearly, but Ebony caught fragments like, "And this is ridiculous." Moments later, 2 other flight attendants flanked Karen, guiding her back down the aisle, right past Ebony and Elijah. Karen's face was a storm of rage and confusion. She locked eyes with Ebony for a second, as though silently blaming her for this abrupt shift in fortunes. Ebony's heart pounded. She had no idea what was going on, but it felt like an intervention orchestrated from some invisible command tower, her father, presumably. Karen followed the attendants to row 27. Ebony almost gasped, thinking they were about to dump Karen on top of them, but instead the attendants ushered Karen to row 28, an aisle seat next to a sleeping passenger. The blatant downgrade left her sputtering in indignation. Ebony could hardly believe what she was witnessing. Then Captain Hayes stepped forward, addressing Ebony and Elijah directly, his eyes flicking to Ebony's phone. "Pardon me," he began, voice laced with tense courtesy. "We've had some clarifications come in from corporate about the seat assignments. Apparently, there was a major error in how we handled things earlier. You two should have never been asked to move." Elijah's eyes widened. "So, does that mean?" Robert Evans chimed in, looking deeply uncomfortable. "We'd like to offer you 2 seats in business class free of charge for the remainder of the flight." Ebony and Elijah exchanged stunned glances. Ebony took a breath, remembering all the humiliation they'd just endured. "You're offering us business class now after you threatened to kick us off?" Captain Hayes glanced sideways at Robert, clearly regretting how everything had escalated. We understand how this must look. Let me assure you, we genuinely apologize. Corporate insisted that we correct our mistake immediately. Karen, craning her neck from row 28, practically hissed. You can't just yank me out of my seat and move me back here. This isn't how airlines treat loyal customers. Pamela, the supervisor, maintained a tight smile. Miss Caldwell, we're trying to remedy a significant error. The seat you were moved to was never rightfully yours. We've offered you a seat in premium economy, which is still consistent with your original booking. You're punishing me, Karen spat, ignoring the stares from nearby passengers. Ebony felt her pulse race. This was the moment to stand their ground or accept the more comfortable seats. Yet, she also felt a flash of schadenfreude. Karen was now the one forced to move, and so far back it must have felt like a personal insult to her inflated sense of importance. Robert cleared his throat. Mr. Elijah, Miss Ebony, we'd be honored if you'd accept business class seating for the rest of the flight. Please. Ebony glanced at Elijah, who shrugged and mouthed, why not? They carefully unbuckled and gathered their belongings. Passengers nearby clapped softly or nodded their approval, evidently aware that justice was being served. Ebony stepped into the aisle, feeling the weight of countless eyes. She paused in front of Karen, who glared daggers. Enjoy your seat, Ebony said softly, letting just a hint of triumph creep into her tone. She then followed Elijah and the flight attendants to the front cabin. It was a surreal reversal in fortunes. Just hours ago, Ebony and Elijah had been humiliated, and now they were getting a taste of luxurious seats with fully reclining chairs, upgraded meals, and personalized service. They settled into business class, still reeling from the abrupt turn of events. The seat was plush with ample space for Elijah's legs. Almost immediately, a flight attendant offered them warm towels and an apology for the inconvenience. Ebony kept her phone in her lap, discreetly recording everything. She flicked her gaze out the window and thought about her father. Thank you, Dad, she whispered under her breath. She didn't know the full extent of what Charles had done, only that his influence had changed the flight crew's attitude in record time. What Ebony and Elijah couldn't yet fathom was that this was just the beginning. By the time they landed in Los Angeles, the entire affair would explode in a public relations nightmare for Skyways Airlines, and the crew would find themselves at the center of a controversy that no rebooking or complimentary upgrade could ever fix. Meanwhile, on the ground, Skyways Airlines corporate headquarters in Atlanta was abuzz with frantic activity. Phone lines lit up, emails soared back and forth, and top executives scrambled to piece together how a routine domestic flight had erupted into a potential media crisis. A cluster of high-ranking officials, including CEO Victoria Hales and COO Lucinda Frost, convened in an emergency video conference. Charles Davenport joined from his Manhattan office, his face unreadable as he listened to the steps the corporate team planned to take. I've already forwarded the internal memo to all relevant departments, Lucinda said, tapping her tablet. The flight crew, once landed, is to be immediately debriefed. Our public relations team is drafting a statement, though we hope this remains an internal matter. Charles let out a silent scoff at Lucinda's last remark. Considering Ebony had recorded large parts of the incident and other passengers had begun sharing phone videos, it was almost certain this would leak. What about Margaret Caldwell? Charles inquired, his voice measured but firm. CEO Victoria Hales grimaced. She's a platinum frequent flyer, a longtime customer. However, we've reviewed her record. She's actually lodged multiple frivolous complaints against our staff in the past, citing everything from minor delays to seat preference issues. This is the first time she's forced other passengers out of their seats, though. Clearly, her loyalty was overshadowed by her misconduct. Charles raised a brow. So, you're saying you've known she can be difficult? She's notorious among certain flight crews, Lucinda confirmed. But as a high-level frequent flyer, we've always handled her with kid gloves. We had no idea it would escalate to forcibly displacing other passengers, let alone your children. Charles inhaled slowly, holding back the surge of anger that threatened to erupt. Well, now you do, he said, voice low. I want a complete investigation of Flight 722. Every minute from boarding to mid-flight. I want statements from the captain, from the flight attendants, from Karen, Miss Caldwell, and from my children. Any sign of discrimination or policy violation will be met with appropriate disciplinary action. Victoria and Lucinda exchanged tense glances. We'll do exactly that, Victoria assured him. Once the plane lands, we'll gather everyone's testimony. If your children are up for it, we'd appreciate their account. Charles nodded. Oh, they'll be ready to talk, he said. And one more thing, Victoria. If I find any hint that Ebony and Elijah were targeted because of their race, or that Miss Caldwell's demands were accommodated due to prejudice, this won't just be a matter of company policy. It'll become a personal crusade to tear down whoever participated or enabled it. His tone was cold, leaving no room for doubt. He would protect his children at all costs. The corporate call ended shortly thereafter with the top brass scrambling to set the wheels in motion. Charles was left alone in his office, a cauldron of fury and relief swirling within him. At least Ebony and Elijah were safe for now, enjoying business-class comfort. But the real storm was just beginning. The last thing he wanted was a scandal to overshadow Ebony's talent for filmmaking or Elijah's dreams of becoming a concert pianist. Yet, if a scandal was what it took to ensure justice, so be it. Back in the corridors of Skyway's headquarters, executives debated how best to control the narrative. One official even suggested offering hush money vouchers to Ebony and Elijah, which Lucinda promptly shot down with a glare. They couldn't silence the truth with travel credits, and especially not once the public caught wind that two young black passengers were forced to relocate for a belligerent Karen, only to have the flight crew do an about-face under external pressure. The entire fiasco threatened to blow wide open, tarnishing the airline's carefully cultivated image of inclusivity and customer care. A staffer approached Lucinda, whispering something urgent in her ear. She nodded grimly. Another passenger on Flight 722 had already posted a tweet that read, on #Skyways722, just watched two black siblings get booted from their seats for an entitled lady. Now they got upgraded back to business. Wild. Something big is going on. The tweet was starting to gain traction. Lucinda's day was about to get a lot more complicated. She just hoped that once Ebony and Elijah landed, they'd be willing to hear the company's apology before taking their story public. Because from the looks of it, this was shaping up to be exactly the type of PR nightmare that no airline wants, one that involves allegations of racism, abuse of power, and the humiliation of innocent passengers, even if those passengers turned out to be the owner's children. As Flight 722 touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, Ebony and Elijah felt both anticipation and dread swirling in their stomachs. The landing was smoother than expected, but the real turbulence they knew was about to happen on the ground. They disembarked among the first passengers, courtesy of their last-minute upgrade to business class. The moment they stepped into the jet bridge, they spotted two suited officials waiting. One man, one woman, both with Skyway's badges. "Miss Davenport, Mr. Davenport," the man asked politely. His tone was deferential, as though he were addressing royalty. Ebony and Elijah exchanged surprised glances. "Yes, that's us," Ebony said. The woman official smiled, though her face was tense. "Welcome to Los Angeles. Mr. Davenport has arranged for immediate transport to a private conference room. There's a short meeting scheduled with select members of our team." She paused. "We understand this has been a very upsetting journey for you both. We want to ensure you're comfortable and heard." Elijah, still a bit shell-shocked, could only nod. Ebony took a breath and said, "Sure, let's go." Part of her wanted to skip all this corporate drama. She was exhausted and just wanted to rest, but she also sensed that her father had set this in motion. They followed the officials down the terminal, bypassing the usual crowds at baggage claim. Karen was nowhere in sight, and Ebony felt a fleeting surge of relief that they didn't have to face her again right now. Elijah looked at Ebony, letting her take the lead. She squared her shoulders and spoke directly, her voice unwavering. What happened was more than just a booking error. We were threatened with being kicked off the flight if we didn't comply. We were humiliated in front of everyone. And we can't ignore that Miss Caldwell's behavior was racially charged. Whether or not you realized it at the time, it felt like we were dismissed because she was a preferred passenger and we were just two black kids who apparently didn't look like we belonged in premium seats. Captain Hayes lowered his gaze. "I'm truly sorry," he murmured again. Through the laptop screen, Lucinda Frost interjected. "We're conducting a full investigation. Miss Caldwell will also be required to provide her statement. Based on the outcome, disciplinary actions will be taken to ensure this never happens again." Ebony raised her chin. "I don't want to see good people lose their jobs, but I do want accountability. What Karen did was unacceptable, and the crew's response, especially the threat to remove us, was just as unacceptable." Charles Davenport, speaking for the first time, nodded in agreement. "Indeed, this airline prides itself on fairness and inclusivity. Today, it failed my children. That failure is on all of us, from me as the owner down to the cabin crew." Elijah's eyes widened slightly at the words "as the owner." He whispered to Ebony, "Did you know he actually owns Skyways?" Ebony gave a minute shake of her head. They could process that revelation later. Miss Beecham cleared her throat, scanning the tension in the room. "For now, Ebony and Elijah, please know that your father has made it clear we must rectify this. We've already begun the process. The question is, how do you want to proceed? Legal action, formal complaints, media coverage, or perhaps a direct resolution with the airline?" Elijah spoke up, surprising even himself with his composure. "I just want to get to my audition, which is tomorrow morning." His voice cracked slightly. "I've practiced so hard. This fiasco, it almost ruined everything." Charles gave a sympathetic nod. "We'll get you there in style, son. And Ebony, I'll support your decisions on how to address this, but rest assured, I will ensure changes are made at the highest level." Ebony could see the genuine remorse in Captain Hayes's eyes, and Robert Evans, too, seemed genuinely contrite. "I want a formal apology from Miss Caldwell," Ebony declared. "And a promise that this airline will train its staff better to handle seat disputes, especially when racial bias might be involved." Lucinda answered, "You have our word on that. Whatever it takes." And with that, the confrontation ended on a heavy but hopeful note. Ebony and Elijah's father was no longer just a distant figure. He was their guardian in a very real sense, one who could pull strings and ensure justice. Now the stage was set for the final act, Karen's day of reckoning, when she would face consequences for her arrogance and bigotry, and Ebony and Elijah would walk away, not as victims, but as victors, determined to share their story with the world. After the conference room meeting, Ebony and Elijah were escorted to a luxurious black SUV waiting outside the terminal. They climbed in, feeling a strange cocktail of relief and lingering tension. Their father's voice came through the vehicle's speakerphone. "I'm proud of you both for staying strong. Rest tonight. Focus on Elijah's audition tomorrow. We'll handle the rest." Ebony turned to Elijah. "You ready to put this behind us? At least for now." He let out a long breath. "I think so. Got to switch gears to my audition. That's the priority." The driver took them to a 5-star hotel. All expenses covered by Skyways as a gesture of good faith. As they arrived at the grand lobby, Ebony noticed a flurry of social media notifications on her phone. People were tagging her in posts about the Karen incident on Flight 722, some with partial videos from other passengers. Ebony considered uploading her own footage, but decided to wait until after speaking more with her father. For now, Elijah's audition was paramount. And indeed, for Ebony and Elijah, the ordeal had come full circle. They found justice, discovered more about their father's secret influence, and affirmed their own resilience in the face of prejudice. Meanwhile, Karen, once so confident in her superiority, faced the consequences of her actions, banned from Skyways, widely mocked on social media, and possibly dealing with lawsuits from the airline. Karma, it turned out, had a way of flying back around at 30,000 feet. What began as a simple cross-country flight became an unforgettable tale of arrogance, prejudice, and ultimate redemption. Ebony and Elijah were nearly stripped of their seats and their dignity by a single entitled Karen, only to discover that their father, Charles Davenport, owned the very airline that had wronged them. Their fight for justice exposed the power dynamics at play, forcing both the airline crew and Karen herself to face the consequences. In the end, integrity and truth prevailed, giving Ebony and Elijah the resolution they deserved. If you found this story compelling, there's more to come. Because standing up for your rights can transform not just your life, but also entire systems. So, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Dark Stories for more dramatic, thought-provoking stories. Your support fuels our passion for storytelling and shining a light on the issues that matter most. Thank you for watching.